We're coming on the air with students at Michigan State now trying to find a way to process their grief and their rage after the death of 3 of their classmates in a mass shooting, with marches on the Capitol to push for tougher gun laws. We're live on campus with more on how raw this is, how angry they are, and the big questions on how do you actually keep college students safe. Plus, just in the last couple of minutes, the FDA making a decision that may save thousands of lives by letting people more easily get their hands on a key drug that can reverse an overdose. We've got that big news coming up. And some of the shocking moments before an Alabama man died in police custody. Literally frozen to death, his family says. Why his mom's lawyer is calling it the worst case of inmate abuse he's ever seen. Plus, a new study showing an experimental drug can turn off sperm. Why experts say this might be a game changer for male birth control, and why women are saying, finally. And we'll take you thousands of feet under the sea with some never-before-seen up-close video of the Titanic, a clip you will not want to miss. That's coming up a little bit later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight people across Michigan are getting ready to stand together and honor the victims of that mass shooting at Michigan State University. In the next couple of hours, you've got vigils at Michigan State and its big rival, the University of Michigan, along with the various hometowns of the 3 students who were killed. Their surviving classmates leaving painted messages at the Rock. It's kind of like the meeting place for MSU. Some of those messages memorialize the classmates who died. You see their names being written here. Ariel Anderson, Brian Frazier, Alexandria Verner. The 5 students who were hurt, by the way, are still in critical condition. You also saw some other messages that were more political. Look at this. One group writing, "Allow us to defend ourselves and carry guns on campus." Other students are outside the state capitol in nearby Lansing, demanding new and tougher gun laws. You're seeing the sit-in here with speeches all day into the night. Watch.
Please take a moment to sit with us and to listen to us and to be with us, because you won't be us, you haven't been us, and hopefully soon you'll never be us. But it could be any of you.
All of it comes as the campus just tries to pick up the pieces. Some of that is literal. By the way, the FBI is working with students to actually pick up the stuff they may have left behind as they were running to safety Monday night. Shaq Brewster is on the Michigan State University campus in East Lansing for us. And Shaq, you're hearing some pretty powerful statements from some of the students now after this attack.
Yeah, Hallie, when you go to around campus, you'll see all of these vigils, all of these commemorations and memorials. I was just driving around a little bit, and you see streams of people carrying flowers, ready to have that moment of silent reflection. And when you talk to people there, you get that sadness. You meet people who knew some of the victims, some of the people fighting for their lives, but you also get this sense of purpose and sometimes just raw anger. I want you to listen to one of the conversations I had with a student who was on campus at the time of the shooting, wasn't in the immediate vicinity. But listen to what she said her focus is and her concern is right now.
We're not safe at the grocery store. We're not safe at the movie theater. We're not safe at school, whether it's kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school. Anywhere, kids aren't safe and no one cares.
And no one cares. That sticks out to me because these are students who are going to return to class at some point next week. They're going to go to revisit the same buildings that they were in. Today, we saw that actually happen with some students in the building behind me as the FBI, as you mentioned, escorted them in one by one. Some of them were alone. Some of them were with parents or friends, but nearly all of them came out with tears in their eyes, having to sometimes relive that moment and that fear that they experienced. So definitely tough and emotional times here on campus, Hallie.
And there's so many questions, Shaq, because college campuses, in many ways, in most instances, are uniquely vulnerable, with people able to get on a lot of times without needing to show ID or whatever. This map, for example, shows all the shootings we've seen on campuses over the last year. Coast to coast. You're about to see it. In states with strict gun laws, in states with less strict gun laws, there doesn't seem to be any kind of correlation. How is this, like, help us understand the framing now around these questions of how do you keep college students safe? It's a question parents are asking, the students themselves are asking it.
Right, and it's a question that both the police chief and the FBI special agent in charge, they were not able to answer at this point. They say there will be adjustments being made. They don't want to list them because they say those adjustments will look different for each building, for each situation, for each scenario. This will be a community conversation, Hallie, whether or not those buildings should be locked, for example, whether or not there should be an ID to get in. But that just speaks to the fear that students have because they know that the ultimate solution is not going to come before they are called to or told to go back to class, Hallie.
Shaq Brewster live for us there in East Lansing, Michigan. Shaq, thank you very much. So listen, you have to watch some extraordinary moments in court today during the sentencing of the Buffalo supermarket shooter who killed 10 people in a racist attack last year. You're seeing it there. I want to play it for you full. Watch. That's a relative of one of the victims lunging at the shooter. You see him being held back by security. Security took both men eventually out of the room after that very dramatic, very emotional moment. Just one of several, including a statement from the judge, making clear how horrific this attack was as she sentenced the shooter to life in prison with no chance of parole.
There is no place for you or your ignorant, hateful, and evil ideologies. You will never see the light of day as a free man ever again.
The shooter himself apologizing, but in one moment, as he does, somebody in court starts yelling. Listen.
You don't need that
A lot of that was bleeped out, but listen, it speaks to how emotional this day has been for so many families, some of whom showed up in that courtroom. Rahima Ellis has been watching all of it for us. And Rahima, we heard that emotion from some of the victims' families in court speaking today, right?
We sure did. And it's one of the things that strikes me in instances like this. Sometimes you hear the families of the victims, they express grace. That was expressed today. But there was also expressions of pain, sadness, and anger over their loved ones' lives being taken in such a violent, senseless way. Listen to what some of the families had to tell us.
Our dear grandmother, Ruth Elizabeth Whitfield, she taught us the power of love. And even in our darkest hour, we will ensure that her legacy will be that.
When people ask, how many children do you have? I don't know what to say. She was a teacher. She was my best friend. She was anything at any given time. Kat was a protector.
There were 10 people killed in this racist attack almost 9 months ago. And the victims of these family members, they all spoke out. You could hear some of it. It was so much pain expressed in that room today as these impact statements were presented to the court before the judge sentenced this gunman to, as you heard and you mentioned, to life in prison without any possibility of parole.
Right. And it wasn't just the murder charges, the attempted murder charges. There was also a very specific domestic terrorism related to hate charge that New York State had never seen before.
Yeah, that's right, because it's a new charge that New York had imposed for crimes like this, and this young man was now finding himself sentenced to this life sentence because of what he did. He also was. There were 3 other people who were injured during this attack last year who did not die, but they were seriously injured, so their lives are wounded forever as well. Hallie?
Rahima Ellis, thank you very much for being on top of that one for us tonight. Again, very emotional, a dramatic day in court. To politics now, with 2024 taking shape today with the first official campaign rally for the first official Republican candidate not named Donald Trump. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley rolling out her presidential announcement by framing herself as the person to bring generational change to the party and to the country. She's 51. President Biden is 80. Former President Trump is 76. Which is why this line you're about to hear from her today and this tone signals something about where she's headed. Listen.
In the America I see, the permanent politician will finally retire. We'll have term limits for Congress. And mandatory mental competency tests for politicians over 75 years old.
Mr. Trump, for his part, one of those politicians over 75 years old, is on defense with his campaign knocking Haley for what she said before on issues like health care, immigration, so-called bathroom bills. And while she is the only other formal Republican candidate out on the trail tonight, there are plenty of potential candidates fanning out across the country, including the guy you see on the right-hand side of your screen, former Vice President Mike Pence, who is in the key early state of Iowa tonight. We saw Pence literally about 10 seconds ago talking with reporters. He just wrapped up, including with our own Vaughn Hilliard, who we'll check in with in just a second. But I want to start with Allie Vitale, who's posted up for us in South Carolina. And what is so interesting here, Allie, is right now it is a two-person race. It is Donald Trump and Nikki Haley officially. That'll change in the next few months here. She is somebody who has had to walk the line, who has chosen to walk the line between embracing former President Trump and distancing herself from him. And it appears she's going to have to do that, at least in the initial part of her campaign, too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But that's a charge that not just Haley is going to have to handle, but someone like Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo, all members of former President Trump's administration, and all people who are going to have to toe the line between having supported in various ways the America First Trump agenda, but then also arguing that they should turn the page from Trumpism. Haley didn't mention Trump's name here at all today. It's not entirely surprising, but all of us caught those not so subtle digs as she tried to make this a binary technically between her and President Joe Biden, but everyone knows she has to get through a primary with Trump and an array of other Republican candidates before that. And so in the same ways that she was attacking Biden on issues like his age and acuity, those are similar themes that could come back around at the former president as well. She's clearly not ready to go there. But look, at a certain point, she's going to have to, especially for all these folks who served in the Trump administration. It's a differentiation that they're ultimately going to have to make.
She's not just the youngest person officially in the race. She's also, like, listen, the only woman, and the only woman candidate who we think is going to run on the Republican side, likely, although there is some discussion about what might, for example, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney do. She said something interesting, though, today, Nikki Haley. She says she doesn't believe in glass ceilings, Alec.
Yeah, so not surprising, but of course, you know that I was so interested in the way that she would take on gender here, especially because in the announcement video that she did, she talked about kicking back in heels and having it hurt more. There were several references to her gender there, and she made those references here again today. Yes, she might be the only woman to run in this field. We've got questions about Liz Cheney, questions about South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. Those are the other women that could round out the field. But the fact that Haley is running, she's not running gender forward. You appear how you appear, and so she did speak to the fact that she is a woman of color and that she has broken barriers in being a woman of color elected governor here in the state of South Carolina. But she did a very Republican thing today that every operative and strategist that I talked to for my book warned me she would do, and warned me that candidates of color and women on the Republican side have to do, which is make sure that they don't lean too far into gender and identity politics, because the conservative base, they absolutely hate that. We watched Nikki Haley do that delicate dance today as well.
Allie Vitale, thank you much. As we will do so often over the next year, we will take you now to Iowa, where you're seeing Vaughn Hilliard pop up. It's where former Vice President Mike Pence is in town for a rally on public schools' transgender policies after a stop in Minnesota, where he's talking for the first time on camera about fighting a subpoena that's been issued by the Justice Department. Let me bring in Vaughn, because Vaughn, literally 45 seconds ago when we saw you pop up, you had just been talking with a group of other reporters to the former VP. Talk about this. Why won't he comply with this subpoena related to the January 6th investigation by the special counsel?
Right. Hallie, we'll get a little bit more into the granular part of it, but I just will let you just hear from the former vice president directly and a little bit of what he was just telling us. Take a listen.
The Constitution prohibits an executive branch from summoning anyone into court for their legislative actions or duties. So I believe that that speech and debate clause of the Constitution actually prohibits the executive branch from compelling me to appear in a court, as the Constitution says, or in any other place. And we'll stand on that principle, and we'll take that case as far as it needs to go, if needs be, to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Now, Hallie, for as much as the former vice president would like to be forward-looking here, the subpoena looms over what has been really heightened attention over the last 2 years about his role in those weeks leading up to January 6th and the pressure that he faced from former President Trump to help overturn the 2020 presidential election. And what you heard him just lay out there is going to be their legal defense. And that is that on January 6th, he was serving in the capacity of the president of the Senate, therefore a part of the legislature legislative body. And that clause in Article 1 of the Constitution that he was outlining protects House and Senate members of the legislative body from essentially criminal liability, from legal inquiries, allowing them to deliberate without the threat of being charged criminally. And so what he is contending is that he was playing that role and is therefore protected from having to talk about his experiences and the deliberations about what actions he was going to take on January 6th.
Vaughn, I see you on the campaign trail there. Just give us the quick vibe check, right? Because even though Mike Pence is not a formal presidential candidate yet, like Nikki Haley is, he's still on the trail, right? I mean, it's undeniable.
Right. He's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa here. He was in Minnesota earlier today. He was trying to
ranch,
focus this event at a pizza ranch. There's about 200-something of them around the state here, and he was trying to focus on this local school district that instituted a policy that allows for gender-affirming care and for students to choose their pronouns of which to go by at school. But, of course, that's where this subpoena is very much, and the investigation is very much on the minds of voters, too. I had a conversation with several of them, and they said the events around January 6th definitely impacted the way they view Donald Trump, but also whether they want to go with somebody who is outside of the administration there that day, somebody like a Nikki Haley or a Ron DeSantis here. All this very much is intertwined with 2020 is intertwined with 2024, Hallie.
And 2016 before it, too, I would go so far as to suggest. Vaughn Hilliard live for us in Iowa State. You know well. Thank you, friend. To an NBC News exclusive tonight, our own Courtney Kube, one-on-one with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Europe, just days before the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine. But it comes as the Defense Department is also facing questions about this and U.S. national security, right after 4 different objects flying over American airspace, including that Chinese spy balloon, were shot down just inside the last couple of weeks. Listen.
The fact that the U.S. military didn't know about these until recently, is that an intelligence failure? Was that a military failure?
No, it's how you use your radars. We typically are focused on things that are moving fast, and so it's a bit more difficult to collect on slow-moving objects like a balloon. And as they made adjustments, we were able to see some of that.
Joining us now, Courtney Kube, live for us from overseas. Courtney, great interview. And let's start with these objects the military shot down. Interesting to hear the secretary talk about the idea of how they kind of tune their radar, because there were some questions of, after the Chinese spy balloon, there were these 3 other objects. Did those get picked up because of a change in radar? Did that change back now? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, they did get picked up because of the radar. They basically refined what they're looking at. So in the past, something they may not have seen at all, or they may have just dismissed as clutter, they're now taking a closer look at. That's what happened in the case of these 3 unidentified objects. And as far as we know, Hallie, there's been no change back to the less refined radar. So theoretically, if these kinds of objects are still in the air floating around the U.S. should be seeing them. Now, we asked that question specifically today. Secretary Austin saying he's not aware of any more objects that they've been tracking in the last 48 hours. But it's a question that we need to keep asking and asking to see if they're not only tracking them, but then are they making the decision after these first 3 not to shoot follow-on ones down?
The reason why the secretary is in Europe in the first place, Court, as you well know, is to talk about the war in Ukraine with NATO leaders, nearly a year after Russia first invaded. There is a question now, because the end of year 1 means the beginning of year 2, which is kind of a part of the nightmare scenario that I remember talking with you about, that experts were talking about, 11 months ago here, how long this war would drag out. What does that second year look like? How is the U.S. going to keep helping Ukraine here? Are fighter jets the next big thing?
Well, yeah, that's right. So over the last year, one thing we've seen is the U.S. providing equipment that at one point they think they're concerned is escalatory, but then they end up going one by one and providing them to the Ukrainians. And they are now also providing them with some targeting information, helping them reach some Russian targets and sites. But I asked Secretary Austin specifically about that, is what does the future for this conflict look for the U.S. involvement? Here's what he had to say. Is the U.S. getting more and more directly involved in the war in Ukraine? And how could that evolve over the coming months and years?
We've said a number of times that we are not at war with Russia now, nor will we be. And so I know that Mr. Putin would like to have people believe that, but that is not in fact the case. And the Ukrainians choose their own targets to engage, and they engage them.
Secretary Austin saying he doesn't see a scenario at this point where U.S. advisors or trainers would be on the ground in Ukraine. But the big question is, where does this go from here, Hallie? That's what we'll be watching.
Courtney Kube live for us there overseas in Europe. Court, thank you. We're looking forward to watching more of her interview exclusively with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin tonight on NBC Nightly News, 6:30 Eastern with Lester Holt, wherever you watch your local NBC station. Depending on where you live, you may already be starting to see some of the snow and wind and hail expected tonight and tomorrow. Even the possibility of some very dangerous nighttime tornadoes. Those could hit later on tonight down south, as up north, we're seeing a blizzard stranding more than 100 people off a highway in Minnesota. You have the governor sending in the National Guard to try to help them out. Look at that. I want to bring in Al Roker, who's live for us tonight. Let's talk about these tornadoes, Al, because we know that at night they are more dangerous than during the day. What should people be thinking about and getting ready for?
Well, they've got to get ready for severe weather. They've got to be ready to go at a moment's notice. And they need to be able to do this at night when a lot of the people are sleeping. Let's look at both sides of this storm. So we've got from Michigan all the way to the Four Corners, 32 million people under winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings. You can already see that snow getting itself together out through the plains. But then we've got this area of severe weather with an enhanced risk, kind of a bullseye over parts of Arkansas on into Tennessee and parts of Mississippi. Here's the deal. 14 million people at risk, tornadoes likely, a few of these intense, wind gusts of 70 miles per hour, damaging hail. And this area here from Memphis to Greenville out to Pine Bluff is a risk for EF2 or stronger tornadoes overnight. And that is really bad news. And in fact, tomorrow we've got almost a possibility of a 1,000-mile stretch from Cleveland to New Orleans, 25 million people. Tornadoes, again, intense, but maybe a little less intense than overnight tonight. And then we're looking at this area here with a significant tornado threat from Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Hattiesburg. We're also going to be looking at heavy rain, anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of rain from Memphis to Pikeville. And then Hallie, we've got significant snow, anywhere from 2 to 4 inches as we get towards the plains, Central Plains, up to 6 to 8 inches of snow, Hallie.
Al Roker, thank you for that breakdown. I know you'll have a busy night, a busy morning. We'll see you on Today, tomorrow. Appreciate it. We've got some breaking news to send to us here because the FDA's independent advisory panel is making some significant news here. They have just voted unanimously that the drug Narcan is safe for use over the counter, right? Meaning you can get this basically overdose reversal drug without a prescription if the FDA makes the final green light decision by the end of March. If it happens, you could buy this just at the local pharmacy, wherever, and this is a huge, huge deal. This is a drug that is credited with saving thousands of lives. If it's easier to get a hold of, perhaps you could save even more lives, considering the opioid epidemic in this country. Let's go to Dr. Natalie Azar now. And Dr. Natalie, help us understand. I think I've laid out some of why I think, why we see this as significant. Talk about how medical professionals see this as significant.
Yeah, one of the things I think that we're going to see, that the consequence of this, Hallie, is think about all the community centers who want to have this medication on hand, but it's really cumbersome to get it right now. All 50 states, Hallie, it's available without a prescription currently. All states have what's called a standing order, which means that the pharmacist can look at a set of criteria that would designate somebody as a candidate for this, but the person has to come up to the pharmacy, has to ask the pharmacist for it. It's behind the counter. Think kind of similar to like Advil and Sinus. It's a little bit of a process to get it. And a lot of people, because of stigma and other reasons, may feel very, very uncomfortable doing this. This way, now you got the Advil, but it's on the counter, or it's on, in the, what do you call it? What I'm talking about, at the supermarket, at a convenience store. Yeah. Now anybody can get it. And I think that's just going to increase access for everyone. Right now, when I prescribe any form of a narcotic to a patient, I get an option to give them naloxone with the narcotic. So this is one of those things where it's like anyone who's using any type of opioid pain medication, we're not even talking about fentanyl and heroin, we're talking about people who are using even prescription opioids, really should have this on hand in the case of an accidental and certainly an intentional overdose.
But as happens so often in this country, Dr. Natalie, right, when you talk about drugs, you have to talk about money and cost as well, because it's not clear, it's not a given that insurance is going to cover the cost of this. So then there's questions about access.
Right, and that's the thing, right? So over-the-counter medications generally are not covered by insurance because they're not prescriptions, so you don't submit that to your insurance company. A pack of 2 of these nasal sprays will run about $50. That's pretty darn expensive. And some folks who have overdosed on an opioid require more than 1 dose of the Narcan. You know, so that's going to be an issue. I mean, cost is always, right, in a situation like this. The other thing, Hallie, that the FDA is looking at is how easily interpretable the directions are. There's 5 different steps to this. The drug maker did do a study and said, look, 90% of people were able to administer this to a mannequin, but it wasn't an emergency situation. So the FDA really wants to streamline that too, so that really anyone off the street, even with very little literacy, is able to administer this to someone who they suspect or know has overdosed.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you very much for bringing us this developing news here late tonight here on NBC News Now. Appreciate it. Coming up, the defense for Alec Murdaugh getting a big win in court today. Why it turns out we won't hear from the man at the center of one of the prosecution's arguments. We've got that coming up. Stay with us. Just in the last couple of seconds here, as we've been in that commercial break, we are learning of yet another mid-air close call, this time involving a plane near Honolulu. Coming as you see there, the head of the FAA, the acting administrator, is announcing a call to action, facing some heat on Capitol Hill over a bunch of issues, including, of course, these mid-air near collisions, misses, right? But look at this animation. It's not real video. It was rolled out by the office of Texas Senator Ted Cruz. It visually lays out what could have been a catastrophic collision in Austin earlier this month between a FedEx flight and a Southwest airplane. Look how close they come, within 100 feet of each other. I mean, that is just one of several close calls, including another in Hawaii and New York City, for example. Listen to some of the air traffic control comms as some of these were happening.
Delta 1943, cancel takeoff clearance. Delta 1943, cancel takeoff clearance. Rejecting.
American 106 Heavy, American 106 Heavy, hold position. American 106 Heavy, hold position.
Southwest aboard. FedEx is on the go.
Tom Costello is covering all this and is joining us now. You are not supposed to hear stress like that, right, in the voices of air traffic controllers. We are learning, as you are just approaching set here, that there is yet another close call in Hawaii tonight. Time to all of this on the Hill today. Talk us through.
So let me just be clear that we've just now learned the NTSB says there was another, what they call a runway incursion. This is on the ground in Honolulu.
Okay. So it wasn't in the air. It was on the ground. Got it.
Correct. On the ground. January 23rd, according to the NTSB, a United 777 taxied right across the runway where a small Cessna was coming in for a landing. Thankfully, no collision. It was close. Obviously, a Cessna versus a 777, there's no competition, right? The 777 wins. Thankfully, nobody injured. But this is now the 3rd runway incursion. Now, I'm going to delineate this. Runway incursion is when something happens on the ground. You heard several of them there. JFK Airport, Austin, Texas, and now one in Honolulu. A midair, or something that happens in the sky, is what we're talking about with the United flight, another United flight, that suddenly went into a nosedive, coming within 800 feet of the Pacific Ocean, a steep nosedive, which nobody's explaining, and the NTSB and the FAA are investigating. United will only say that they sent their pilots who were involved back for remedial training. You can discern what you want based on that, but that happened in December. So we are now aware of 4 potentially serious incidents, close calls, thank God, nothing more, in the last few months. So in that context, here's what the FAA acting chief said on Capitol Hill today.
We are experiencing the safest period in aviation history, but we do not take that for granted. Recent events remind us that we cannot and must not become complacent and must continually invest in our aviation system.
Okay, that is the acting FAA chief, Billy Nelson. He is a veteran pilot. He is a veteran safety expert, and he has called a call to action on safety system-wide, nationwide, and they will hold an aviation summit here in Washington next month.
How long is it going to take, right? A call to action to do better, to make sure these things don't happen again. People are flying tonight tomorrow morning. You know, people who are getting on planes want to know that they're going to be okay.
I think the fact that this has gotten so much attention, all of us have been talking about these incidents. Everybody in the aviation world is right now on heightened alert, and they're all going to get the lowdown and the drill down when they come to Washington and they're told we got to do better.
You are a busy man, as always, no more so than tonight. Tom Costello, thank you for being with us. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, have you heard about Raquel Welch? She died today at the age of 82. Her management company said she was briefly sick. She got really famous back in the 60s. She starred in movies like 1 Million Years BC and Fantastic Voyage. She also took home a Golden Globe for her role in The Three Musketeers. Number 2, the Justice Department is ending its sex trafficking investigation into Congressman Matt Gaetz and apparently are not going to charge him with any crimes, his lawyers are telling NBC News. Prosecutors spent months investigating Gaetz' personal conduct and allegations that he was involved in the sex trafficking of a 17-year-old girl. Gaetz has repeatedly denied the allegations. Number 3, police in the UK say a man has admitted to stealing nearly 200,000 chocolate Easter eggs, and he got the good stuff, the Cadbury cream good stuff, man. British police say he took more than $37,000 worth of Cadbury cream eggs and some other candy. He pleaded guilty to criminal damage and theft and is expected to be sentenced next month. Number 4, Rihanna and her new baby and A$AP Rocky are all on the March cover of British Vogue. Look at this. In an interview published today, Rihanna talks about her high-profile Super Bowl halftime show, about being a mom, and her next album. She says it'll hopefully come out this year. Vogue says the interview happened before the star realized she was pregnant with her second baby. Number 5, Rebel Wilson launching a new dating app called Fluid. She tells People magazine it's the first dating app where you don't have to define yourself as straight or gay or bi or describe what you're looking for. To South Carolina now, where prosecutors are wrapping up their case, or expected to, against Alec Murdaugh tomorrow, with the jury seeing the moment back in August 2021 when the lead investigator in this double murder case asked Murdaugh straight up if he killed his wife and son. Watch.
Did you kill Maggie?
No. Did I kill my wife?
Yes, sir.
No, David.
Do you know who did?
You think I killed Paul?
I have to go where the evidence and the facts take me, and I don't have anything that points to anybody else at this time.
So that, obviously, was Alec Murdaugh speaking with Detective David Owen back then. Remember, the murders are what Murdaugh is on trial for, accused of killing his wife Maggie and his son Paul. You see him here. Clearly was emotional during that interview. Prosecutors want to lay out the motive here in this trial. They want to tie in a motive related to the 100+ financial crimes that he's accused of. But we're not going to hear from this guy who is central to that argument, known as Cousin Eddie. Frankly, people watching this trial, court observers, have been waiting for him to testify. It sounds like it's not going to happen. He's accused of helping Murdaugh in a botched suicide attempt / insurance fraud scheme. Danny Savalos is joining us now. And Danny, I think it is fair to categorize this, the fact that we are not going to be hearing testimony from Cousin Eddie, as a win for the defense here, or frankly, a rare victory for Alec Murdaugh's team, given what we've seen in this trial so far. But explain why this is. Why is the judge not going to let us hear from Cousin Eddie?
It has to do with balancing relevance against prejudicial effect. It may be interesting to the jury, and it may even tend to show that Murdaugh is a generally bad guy, but this evidence is outweighed by the prejudicial value. And the judge got it exactly right. I think the judge even took it a step further and said, it's not even relevant. We don't even get to the balancing test because it's not even probative of whether or not he committed this particular crime. This happens all the time. Prosecutors try to argue, oh, everything is part of motive, so all these bad things should come in. And defense attorneys are left saying, no, 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 no. This is just thinly disguised character evidence, and character evidence is generally inadmissible in a case like this. You can't bring in prior bad acts to show that somebody committed this particular bad act, this crime.
We also, we showed that video of Detective Owen with Alec Murdaugh from back in 2021. He was on the stand today, and the prosecution kind of steered him into poking holes into Murdaugh's alibi and acknowledging that there were inconsistencies in what Murdaugh told police. Watch.
It wasn't one inconsistency. It was several inconsistencies over a period of time that were repeated.
So this is the prosecution wrapping up its case. The defense says when it's their turn, they're going to take about a week. When they start, we think, on Friday. You're, put on your defense attorney hat here. Would you put Alec Murdaugh on the stand? Because that's the next big question.
I'm interrupting your question. No, I would not put him on the stand.
Why not?
But that being said, and I'm very sorry, Hallie, I got so excited I had to respond, but you do not generally, as a rule, put your client on the stand unless there's something you absolutely essentially need. Now, I say that with the caveat that Murdaugh has an absolute constitutional right to take the stand and testify. And you may see him testify for that reason. But generally speaking, even for an attorney like Murdaugh, the rules are slanted against him. He's got way too many other problems to be remotely credible in this case. And so then, Hallie, my apologies for interrupting, but I had to get in right away that this is not the case you put your client on the stand.
Danny Savalos, you're a man of many words, and you can say them all right here on NBC News Now. Thank you. Lots to watch as this trial picks back up, we know. When we pick back up here on the show, rescuers in Turkey, can you believe this? They are still finding people alive a week and a half after those deadly earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. We've got the most incredible stories of survival next. At least 6 people have been pulled alive from the debris left from those earthquakes in Turkey today. 6 more people, with one rescuer telling Turkish state news, "I am so excited. We were on the verge of giving up." This is so incredible because, remember, it's the first 72 hours that experts say are so important for finding survivors. But scenes like this one, this is what you are seeing 10 days later. It is remarkable. Again, it is rare. Okay, this isn't happening every 10 minutes, but it is happening at all, period, and that matters. That brings at least a little bit of hope to the incredible devastation that we are seeing across the region here. Nearly 40,000 people have now been confirmed dead. Matt Bradley is live in Turkey and is joining us now. And, 600 buildings is what this rescue push encompasses here. It is a massive area, just geographically and logistically, and that makes a difference 9 days after these earthquakes hit.
That's right. We're talking about a huge area, and the rescue operation, you mentioned how it's still ongoing, and there are still these miracles, of course, and this is, spiriting to all the rescue workers. But if you look behind me, Hallie, we've been here at this exact spot on and off for the past week, and, there's no rescue operation going on here. This is one of those places, one of many places, where they've turned the page, where it's no longer rescue, it is about recovery, and a lot of the focus here really has been quietly shifting away from finding people alive. And that's because for a lot of these places, they've found the people who they thought were there. So it isn't necessarily just they've given up hope. It's that they have sussed out the situation in a lot of these locations and have found the people that were alive. Remember, when these buildings fall in the way that they do, and only a couple of days ago, this was a massive mountain of debris behind me. They kill a lot of people, and those people have no hope of survival. Kill a lot of people within the first moments of the building falling. So it is hard to keep up looking for people once you've determined that there is no longer anyone living underneath that debris. And so we are seeing those numbers of those rescues decreasing.
What about Syria, Matt? It had been hard to get help to the people who need it in that area, given the civil war there, et cetera. Is that changing at all now?
That has changed. And now we've just heard, after a week or more than a week of diplomatic pressure on the regime of Bashar al-Assad, he agreed to open up 2 more border crossings. So now there's 3, and we are seeing more convoys of humanitarian aid going through now the Bab al-Salam crossing. So we are starting to see more aid. But, the real issue is that a lot of this stuff just didn't reach in time to begin with. When we saw these crews combing through, looking for people who were alive under the debris, using heavy equipment, using sophisticated sounding devices and dogs, international rescue and search operations coming and arriving and trying to find people, that didn't happen in Syria. They didn't benefit from that in the same way that they did here in Turkey. So they can bring in as much aid as they want, but it just wasn't there in time when they needed it, because now it's 10 days later.
Matt Bradley, live for us in Turkey. Matt, thank you for being with us. Thank you for still being there on the ground, bringing us those stories. Still to come here on the show, a lawsuit in Alabama claims somebody froze to death while in police custody. What his family's lawyers are saying about the allegations and that shocking video. Plus, the potential for a birth control pill for men. Some scientists are testing a new kind in mice, and they say it looks like it's working. We'll talk about what we know about it later on this hour. We're following a developing story out of Alabama with a new lawsuit now accusing officers just north of Birmingham of tasing an inmate and letting him freeze to death. His name is Anthony Mitchell, and we want to warn you that the video we're about to show you, it is disturbing. We are only going to show it this one time. Just wanted to let that play out because you're seeing guards carrying down Mitchell's body just hours before his death, according to his attorneys. There are some other videos, apparently, but lawyers for Mitchell's mother say the other ones are just too graphic and too disturbing. They're now suing the county sheriff and 13 staffers of abuse and neglect. We've reached out to the sheriff's office. They have no comment, at least not at this point. Zincle Asamoah is following this story for us. And Zincle, you know, the family released that video. It was posted by civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and one of the attorneys called it the worst case of inmate abuse they've ever seen. What do we know about how Mitchell died? The family says he froze to death. What else are we hearing?
Yeah, Hallie, that's right. So most of what we know is from that lawsuit filed by a U.S. district court in Alabama. Anthony Don Mitchell, or Tony as his friends called him, was a 33-year-old man, and he froze to death while incarcerated at a Walker County jail in Alabama. Now, many are outraged. His friends were speaking out today in response to some of this video, some of which you played. Now, an employee actually leaked that security footage of the events leading up to his death. The videos described in the lawsuit reportedly show him dragged naked across the floor and even being tased while naked on the ground by a group of officers. The lawsuit also alleges Mitchell was put in an isolation cell with just a drain, but there was no bed, no toilet, and that he was seen not eating all over the course of 14 days. That's 2 weeks. It also reportedly shows officers laughing at an unresponsive Mitchell. You saw him in that video, unresponsive, as they were going to take him to medical care. And there's just also some of the most disturbing allegations is that he was left in a jail freezer in a restraint chair and then died of hypothermia. It is important to note that an autopsy has not yet been released, but of course, these details so far are enough to raise a lot of alarm, Hallie.
I mean, even just the allegation that he was locked in a freezer and died from hypothermia. What are we hearing from law enforcement on this? Anything?
Yeah, so right now the DA is not commenting at this time, and the Walker County Sheriff's Office has not replied to our request for comment. But there is an in-custody death investigation that was launched by the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency. Now, as for that leak, right, because a lot of this is because of that security video that we've seen, that was actually from the jail supervisor, Karen Kelly, who was fired after she leaked that video. Hallie, she is actually now suing the Walker County Sheriff's Office, alleging that she was retaliated against. So a lot of layers here, but all of them are disturbing. Hallie.
Zincle Asamoah, thanks for being on top of this story for us. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Western Bureau, Arizona officials are warning people in a 1-mile radius of a crash site to stay home after a tanker carrying some dangerous chemicals overturned. Look at that video there. You see that orange cloud, that rather ominous-looking orange stuff on screen? That's nitric acid. Health experts say it can irritate your skin, it could hurt your lungs if you're exposed to it for too long. So far, no word on when that shelter-in-place order is going to be lifted. We're watching it. From our Southern Bureau, hundreds of people at Florida's Capitol today to protest Governor Ron DeSantis' Stop Woke Act and his rejection of an AP African-American history class. Leading the rally, the Reverend Al Sharpton, saying that the Republican governor is using his office, in Sharpton's words, to sanitize Black history from the education system. Out of our Midwest Bureau, the Kansas City Chiefs put on their champagne goggles after a tsunami of fans flooded the team's victory parade today. Players got off the bus in the middle of the parade to celebrate, for their O-line to show off their shirts that had a big old 0 on them because, you know, the Eagles couldn't sack Patrick Mahomes all game. Raise your hand if you're still mad about that. Raise your hand if you're still really upset that you have to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs after the Super Bowl. Let's talk about now a new study that's showing some promising results for a different kind of birth control. Birth control for men. How about that? Scientists are finding that an experimental drug originally developed for eye disease can I don't know how else to say it. It can temporarily turn off sperm, basically. Now, here's the huge caveat. This is still in the super duper duper early stage. Like, it's only being tested on mice right now. But if it continues to do well in tests, it could end up being a game changer. Because right now, there's really only two options for men and contraceptives: condoms or vasectomies. According to one research company, Google searches for "where can I get a vasectomy" went up 850% after Roe versus Wade was overturned last year. So perhaps there is a market, a growing market for male birth control. I want to bring in NBC News medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal. So first of all, I think it is fair to say that many women are probably hearing about the possibility of male birth control and going, freaking finally, right? So what took so long? What could this thing actually do, this pill or whatever form it comes in?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on those sentiments. So, Hallie, basically, it's either a pill or an injection that they tested in mice, and as you pointed out, super duper early stages. But basically, you know, if you think back to your 8th grade biology class or high school biology class, where the sperm has to swim up to the egg and fertilize the egg in order for someone to get pregnant. And so sperm had, like you saw in that picture just before, they have a little tail at the end. And so basically how this drug works is, you can see on the left you have a healthy sperm that's swimming and trying to find this little egg. But on the right, that little guy has been treated with the drug, and he can no longer swim. And if they can't swim, they can't fertilize the egg, and there you go. You can't cause pregnancy. But I should point out, you know, this is just in mice, but what they also found was that there was no difference in mating behavior. And what we think that might mean is that there's no lack of sex drive that comes as a side effect of this drug.
You know, our medical unit has been so helpful as we've been asking a lot of questions about this today. And they've said that, like, there's really never been a male birth control in the United States that has made it to late-stage trials, right? Like, we've never gotten far enough along on the pill or whatever for men. Why is that?
Yeah, you know, the short answer is side effects, really. And to be fair, a lot of the side effects that have been reported in the trials are things that women deal with, honestly, in the current approved methods for birth control, like mood changes or things like acne. But to be fair, in the most recent trial that was stopped a few years ago, they did see really severe acne, really severe changes that, you know, this is something that's going to be given to young, healthy people. The bar to make sure that it's safe is really, really high, and I think that's a lot of the reason why you're not seeing an available birth control for men. Do you want to go ahead?
Oh, I was just going to say, Dr. Syal, sorry to interrupt you, but I was just thinking, like, if this mice pill injection thing does, like, if the studies keep going and going and going, are we talking a decade before this comes around? Are we talking 20 years, 2 years? Like, what's the time frame?
It's, you know, within a decade for this. It has to go through preclinical trials and then clinical trials. I do want to point out there is a gel that could potentially be entering phase 3 trials by the NIH. You actually rub it on your shoulders and you give it a little shoulder rub, and then it reduces your sperm count. That is something that has been safe, well tolerated, could potentially enter phase 3 trials, the last trial to happen before something goes to market.
And that would be the first one, the first kind of male birth control in this country that's made it that far, right?
Exactly.
All right, Dr. Akshay Syal, we'll have you back if that happens. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Coming up, some never-before-seen footage of the first ever dive to the Titanic, just about to be released. We have the sneak peek. We're going to show it to you in just a sec. So we want to show you something here. You're about to see it as soon as we get those words off screen. This is it. This is never before seen video. That's it right there. That's like human eyes have never seen that before. It shows the Titanic wreckage at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. As you can see, obviously this video is not new. A dive team took these images back in 1986. Let's bring in Miguel Almaguer. So Miguel, why are we only seeing this now? I mean, 36 years later.
Yeah, well, Hallie, that footage was never shared before publicly, and it's from the original series of deep-sea dives done back in 1986 when researchers plunged nearly 2.5 miles down to the bottom of the North Atlantic. They took hours of video of the Titanic wreckage. At the time, the images they shared were stunning. Now, to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the blockbuster film The Titanic, they're releasing clips that were never seen by the general public. It's significant because there remains worldwide fascination about the Titanic. The ship, as you know, shoved off from Southampton, England back in 1912, hit an iceberg during its voyage to New York, and then sank. More than 1,500 people died, and while the ship is still at the bottom of the sea, there remains so much interest in that wreckage, Hallie.
There sure does, Miguel, as we're looking at it now. But wait, let me just make sure I understand this correctly. So is James Cameron or whatever, the Titanic movie people, working with Nat Geo to basically get this out to promo the movie?
Well, I mean, I guess it could be seen that way, certainly.
No,
you know,
that's
James Cameron's
no
releasing
judgment. I'm just like, it's just interesting.
No. Totally, because it kind of begs the question, why now and what's new with the footage? And that certainly seems to be kind of one of the angles here that we could certainly be exploring, because all of a sudden these images that we hadn't seen before, pretty similar to images that were released, years ago, is now making its way out on the airways, Hallie.
Not to make you our deep sea expert here, what are we looking at? Like when we're looking at, I could identify a fish, that's about it. So maybe you have more expertise.
Right, so you see the bow of the ship. It's 900 feet long, the entire ship. You see the bow. The camera also peers inside the chief officer's cabin, and along the ship's railing, you see what's called rusticles that have formed since the ship came to the rest on the ocean floor 110 years ago. We're expecting about 80 minutes of video to be released later on tonight. Again, it shows some of the highlights of that ship at the bottom of the sea.
Miguel Almaguer, man, you're getting all the good assignments these days, my friend. Thank you for bringing us that. Appreciate it. Hey, we got a little bit of breaking news to get to before we wrap up the show here. You know how we told you earlier about that Alec Murdaugh trial and the decision to exclude the Cousin Eddie testimony? The judge just reversed that decision. That's not now prosecutors can actually bring up that 2021 insurance fraud scheme / botched suicide attempt as they try to work on tying together a motive for why they say Murdaugh killed his wife and son, something Murdaugh denies. Prosecutors are expected to wrap up their witnesses tomorrow. We will definitely be watching to see if we will hear from Cousin Eddie. TBD. That does it for us this hour. A busy one as always. More for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.